The storm was not a sound. It was a weight. It pressed against Mirabel's ears until the bones of her skull ached, a percussive onslaught that made the fine hairs on her arms tremble. Her cane tapped against wet stone, the sharp click a desperate, failing anchor in the chaos of wind and water, and as the great oak door groaned open before her, the pressure in the air dropped so suddenly she felt it in her teeth. A profound, impossible silence swallowed the storm whole. The air inside Ashford Manor was heavy, cold, and still as a tomb. Dust, so old it smelled of dried roses and forgotten paper, coated her tongue. The door thudded shut behind her, the sound definitive, a lock turning in a cage. Her cane found the edge of a runner, the pile thick and worn beneath its tip, and she followed it, one hand trailing against a wall of cold, sweating stone. Each step was a question in a space that offered no answers, only a vast and echoing emptiness. The house did not breathe. It held its breath. She was not alone. The knowledge settled not from a sound, but from the absence of one. No shuffle of a foot, no rustle of cloth, no intake of air. Just a sudden, localized deadening of the acoustics to her left, as if a column of black velvet had materialized to absorb all vibration. Then the noise began. It wasn't a sound one heard with the ears, but with the entire nervous system. A low, penetrating hum of pure static, a crushing white noise that buzzed deep in her molars and vibrated behind her eyes. It grew, smothering the distant memory of the storm, smothering the scent of dust, smothering her own thoughts. It was a camouflage of sound, a predator's shriek pitched to the frequency of dread. A voice cut through it impossibly close. Miss Locke. Mirabel flinched, her hand flying to her throat. The voice had no source she could track. It didn't echo. It simply was existing in the air directly before her face. It was low, resonant, yet carried a peculiar flatness, like a perfect recording played in a vacuum. There was no telltale puff of breath preceding the words. Mr. Ashford, she managed, her own voice sounding thin and small, a frayed thread in the tapestry of his noise. You came, he stated. Not a question. The static intensified as he moved, the sound shifting as he circled her. It was a physical presence, a wave of pressure that made her dizzy. She gripped her cane tighter. The smooth was her only connection to a tangible world. She could feel him mapping her, his silence, and his noise a far more intimate violation than a gaze. She heard no heartbeat. Not his, not her own. There was only the static, a sound that meant to unmake all other sounds. The piano, she said, forcing the words out. Your letter said it was urgent. It is the voice vibrated, now from behind her. It is a part of the house, and it is unwell. A cool draft touched her hand. She realized he was guiding her, not with a touch, but with a subtle manipulation of the air currents around her. She followed, her cane sweeping arcs before her, the static-shrouded silence her only escort. They walked for what felt like an eternity, the thick runner giving way to polished, cold floorboards that amplified the near-subsonic thrum emanating from him. Finally, her outstretched hand brushed against something vast and wooden, lacquered rosewood, cool and smooth. She traced its elegant curve, her fingers finding the familiar shape of a grand piano. Relief, cool and sharp, trickled through her. This was her world. This she understood. She slid her fingers over the keys, feeling the fine layer of dust on the ivory. She pressed one. A dull, discordant thunk echoed in the cavernous space, the sound immediately devoured by the static. It has not been played in a century. Lucien Ashford's voice murmured from the shadows near the instrument. It has not been touched. Until you. Mirabel took a breath, letting the familiar mechanics of her work ground her. She opened her leather satchel, the click of the brass clasps startlingly loud. Her fingers found the tuning hammer, its heavy, familiar shape a comfort in her palm. She ran her hand along the harp, feeling the thick bass strings, their coiled copper wires gritty with age. She chose a string in the middle octave, C4, the heart of the instrument. She fit the star-tipped hammer onto the tuning pin, the scrape of metal on metal grating. She gave the hammer a slight, exploratory turn to the right, tightening the wire by a fraction. The sound that answered was not the bright ping of a tuning string. It was a gasp, a sharp, shocked, utterly human intake of breath from the darkness where he stood. It was a sound of pure, unexpected pain. Mirabel froze, her hand clamped to the hammer. The white noise emanating from the shadows wavered, spiking into a hiss, like water on a hot skillet. "Did you?" she started, her voice barely a whisper. "Do not," he warned, and the voice was different now. The resonant calm was gone, replaced by a serrated edge of something raw and furious. The static surged, a physical blow of sound that made her ears ring and her stomach clench. It was no longer camouflage. It was a weapon. Do not touch it again. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drum against the crushing, silent hum of him. He was hurt. Her tuning had hurt him. The piano. The man. The thought was insane, a fracturing of logic, but the evidence was undeniable, vibrating through the floorboards, through the very air she breathed. Fear was a cold, not in her belly, but something else coiled with it. A flicker of savage curiosity. For the first time since entering this house, she was not entirely powerless. He had warned her. He had threatened her with his sound, with his presence. But he had also revealed a weakness. Her hand, slick with a sudden sweat, trembled on the tuning hammer. She could leave. She could gather her tools, demand her fee, and flee back into the comparative sanity of the storm. Or, slowly, deliberately, she tightened her grip. She ignored the escalating hiss of static that felt like needles piercing her eardrums. She pressed her thumb against the wire, feeling its tension, and with a minuscule, controlled movement, she turned the hammer again. The result was instantaneous. The static vanished. For one breathtaking, crystalline second, the world returned. She could hear the rain lashing against a distant window pane, the faint groan of ancient timbers settling, the frantic, terrified beat of her own blood in her ears. The silence he left behind was clean, pure, and terrifying in its clarity. In it, she heard another sound, a low, guttural groan of agony ripped from his throat. Then the static crashed back in, twice as powerful, a tsunami of noise that threw her off balance. She stumbled back, one hand flying to the piano lid to steady herself. But she had it. She had the key. Her tuning was his pain. Her touch was his silence. Her breath came in shallow gasps. Her mind raced, connecting the impossible. This house, this man, this instrument is a part of the house, he'd said. A part of him. Her hand slid from the polished lid down to the strings inside. She reached for the C4 wire she had just tightened, her fingertips tracing its path back towards the pin block. The metal should have been cold, inert. But it wasn't. Beneath her touch, the wire felt strangely supple. It seemed to pulse with a faint, rhythmic warmth that matched the phantom beat she felt through the floor. It didn't feel like steel. It felt like sinew, like a living, vascular thing stretched to a scream. The work was a slow, meticulous haunting. Each day, Mirabel would enter the grand salon and the air would thicken, a pressure against her ears that was Lucien's silent greeting. He was waiting. The piano was waiting. Her fingers would find the tuning lever, the metal cold and absolute against her skin. The first turn, the first slight increase in tension on a wire, was always the worst. A low, discordant groan would rise from the piano's belly, a sound that felt less like an instrument and more like a body being forced into a position it could not hold. It was a vibration of pure agony that traveled up the lever, through her arm, and settled deep in her own bones. In the first days, she would have to stop, her hand trembling, a cold sweat breaking on her brow. The room would grow impossibly cold, a silent, desperate plea to cease. But she would not. She would breathe, her own lungs aching in sympathy, and try again. A millimeter's turn, a tap of a key, the resulting note, still sour, but closer to true. And with that small victory, a subtle shift in the room's atmosphere. The oppressive cold would recede just slightly. A wave of something akin to relief would emanate from the wood, a vibration so faint it was more a feeling than a sound, a quiet hum of gratitude that soothed the ache in her own joints. They developed a language, a catechism of tension and release. She would work on a single note, striking it over and over, adjusting the pen by infinitesimal degrees. Each strike sent a ripple through the floorboards. She learned to read the echo. A sharp, angry reverberation meant she had gone too far. A dull, hollow thud meant the string was still slack, lifeless. But when she found the precise point, the note would bloom. It wouldn't just sound right, it would feel right. The vibration would be a perfect, resonant circle, spreading outward from the instrument to fill the room. And within that circle, she could feel Lucien's presence coalesce, a quiet sigh of approval that was not sound but a settling of the dust motes in the air. This intimacy was a poison. Every note she corrected, every harmony she restored, seemed to draw something from her. She would leave the salon feeling hollowed out, her own energy frayed and thin, as if the life she was breathing back into the instrument was her own. She would eat ravenously in the kitchens, the cook leaving her thick bread and cheese, but the food felt like ash in her mouth. Sleep offered no respite, filled with dreams of endless, resonating wires stretching into a dark void. They shared more than just the mechanics of tuning. In the long silences between adjustments, resting her hand on the piano's casework, she felt echoes of memory bleed through the wood. Not clear images, but raw sensations. The thrumming vibration of a cavalry charge across a frozen field. The resonant, joyful peal of 1,000 bells on a festival day, felt through the stone of a high cathedral tower. The sharp, percussive shock of a blade striking bone. His memories were a symphony of violence and beauty, centuries compressed into tactile feelings that left her breathless. She learned his tastes. He preferred the melancholic drag of the minor keys, the deep, resonant notes in the bass that vibrated with the weight of ages. He recoiled from anything too sharp, too staccato, a physical shudder running through the piano's frame if she tested a sequence of high, bright notes too quickly. It was a dance, this tuning, a slow, dangerous waltz conducted in silence, where her every touch could either soothe a centuries-old wound or tear it open again. She was both his physician and his torturer, and the line between the two grew thinner with every wire she tightened. One afternoon, as she was coaxing the last bit of warble from a stubborn G-sharp, the fragile piece was shattered. It wasn't a loud noise, not at first. It was the alien vibration of a heavy, determined footstep on the manor's stone threshold, not the butler's deferential shuffle, nor the cook's brisk trot. This was a man's tread, heavy with arrogance and ownership. The sound scraped against the profound silence of the house, a nail dragged across slate. The piano beneath her fingers went rigid. The low, ambient hum that was Lucien's constant presence vanished, replaced by a dead, tense silence. The air grew cold, but this was a different cold. Not as melancholy, but a sharp, hostile frost. The salon door was thrown open. Not pushed, but thrown, the heavy wood slamming against the doorstop with a concussive boom that made the floorboards jump. The resulting echo was ugly, a chaotic rattle that died in the corners of the room. Ashford, a voice boomed, and the sound itself was an act of violence. It was a gravelly baritone, but with a sharp, metallic edge, like stones grinding together. Still hiding in the dark? I heard you'd acquired a new pet. Mirabel froze, her hand hovering over the keys. The man's footsteps entered the salon. They were slow, deliberate, each heel strike a punctuation mark of intrusion. He walked a circuit of the room, and she could track his position by the way the sound of his boots changed from the rug to the barewood near the windows. While the voice continued, much closer now, she heard the soft clink of metal on glass. He was tapping a window pane with what sounded like a ring. A sharp, rhythmic tink, tink, tink that drilled directly into her ear. It was a sound designed to disorient, to claim the sonic landscape. What have we here? The little mouse for the old cat. She felt a draft as he passed her, smelled the unpleasant, sharp scent of industrial oil and damp wool. Roderick Flint, he announced, his voice now directly behind her. She didn't flinch, but it took all her will. Lord Ashford invited me. He has a piece he's considering divesting. I'm here to appraise its value. The word divesting hung in the air, thick with malice. He wasn't talking about the house. He moved to the piano. She heard his knuckles rap sharply against the polished wood of the lid. Thump, thump, thump. It was a butcher's knock, a sound of assessment before slaughter. The instrument beneath her hands felt as if it had turned to ice. An Erard, 1888, if I'm not mistaken, Flint said, his voice laced with a connoisseur's dismissive pride. Remarkable condition. On the outside, he ran a hand along the casework, and the sound of his rough skin whispering over the varnish was a profanity. But these old beasts, they rot from the inside. Worms in the felt, cracks in the soundboard. The soul goes out of them. Mirabel remained silent, her posture a rigid line of defiance. She was a shield standing between this man and the very real, very terrified soul trapped within the instrument. And you, he said, his attention snapping back to her. You're the tuner. Ashford's letter was quite specific. Said you had a unique sensitivity to... She heard a faint, metallic scraping sound. He was pulling a chair over, its legs screaming in protest against the polished floor. He sat down heavily, too close to her, the groan of the chair another sonic intrusion. He failed to mention you were blind. He said the word blind with a kind of sadistic relish. It wasn't a statement of fact. It was a weapon. My eyes have nothing to do with my work, Mirabel said, her own voice sounding thin and reedy in the suddenly hostile space. Oh, I disagree, Flint purred. The metallic edge of his voice seemed to sharpen. I think it has everything to do with it. A finer sense of hearing, of touch. You must feel every little secret this piano holds, Every whisper in the wires. He reached past her, his sleeve brushing her arm. It felt coarse, damp. His fingers, clumsy and forceful, jabbed at a key in the upper register. The note was pure and true, one she had spent a full day perfecting. But under his touch, it sounded like a shriek. Good tension, he muttered, almost to himself. Very good. The girl knows her craft. He began to play, if it could be called that. It wasn't music. It was an assault. He struck random chords, jarring combinations of notes from the highest and lowest registers, creating a cacophony that felt designed to cause pain. The piano bucked and groaned under the attack, the vibrations chaotic and agonizing. It felt like a violation, and Mirabel had to grip the edge of the piano bench to keep from crying out. Each dissonant chord was a physical blow. But the true test, Flint said, stopping his auditory vandalism as abruptly as he'd begun, is the integrity of the frame. The heartwood. She heard a soft thud as he placed something on the piano's lid. Then the unmistakable, chilling sound of metal tools clinking against each other. A small, heavy hammer. A chisel. Her blood ran cold. What are you doing? She demanded, her voice trembling with a rage that surprised her. An appraisal, little mouse. A thorough one, he said conversationally. Sometimes, a single key can tell you everything you need to know about the health of the entire instrument. You have to listen for the fracture. She heard him select a tool. The small, dense weight of a watchmaker's hammer. She guessed by the sound. She felt the air move as he lifted his arm. He was aiming for a key in the middle register. One of the notes she had just brought into perfect, soul-soothing harmony. Tom seemed to slow down. She heard the whistle of the small hammer cutting through the air. She braced herself for the impact, for the ugly, percussive thwack of metal on ivory. The sound came, a sharp, dead crack, but it was instantly consumed by another sound. From the deepest part of the piano, from the very soul of the wood and wire, a scream erupted. It was not human. It was the sound of grinding tectonic plates, of a star collapsing, of a silence 1,000 years old being torn apart. It was a sound wave of pure, undiluted agony and rage that was not merely heard but felt. Mirabel was thrown back against the bench as the vibration slammed into her. It traveled through the floor, up her spine, and vibrated in her teeth until she thought they would shatter. The pressure in the room became immense, a physical force that made her ears pop and her lungs seize. She heard a high-pitched, splintering sound from across the room. The great window overlooking the moors, its glass cracking into a spiderweb of 1,000 fissures from the sheer sonic power of the cry. The scream cut off as suddenly as it began, leaving a silence that was more terrifying than the noise itself. It was a vacuum, a void where sound had been murdered. The only noise was the faint, crystalline tinkle of the fractured window pane settling in its frame and the frantic, rabbit-like pounding of Mirabel's own heart. In that dead silence, Roderick Flint began to laugh. It was a low, guttural, triumphant sound. "Oh yes," he rasped, his voice filled with a horrifying discovery and delight. "There it is, the soul of the thing." Mirabel couldn't breathe. Her hands flew to her ears, though the assault had been felt in her very marrow. The piano under her fingertips was now vibrating with a new frequency, a low, pained thrum of profound trauma. It felt like touching a wounded animal, shivering and bleeding in the dark. The connection she had forged with Lucien, once a delicate dance, was now a raw, exposed nerve. She could feel his pain as if it were her own, a deep, resonant ache that started in her chest and spread to every extremity. Flint's chair scraped again as he stood. His heavy footsteps approached her, stopping right beside the bench. She could feel the heat radiating from his body. "Did you feel that, little tuner?" he whispered, his voice a conspiratorial rasp that slid into her ear like a splinter of ice. "Extraordinary. Absolutely extraordinary. I've been hunting for one of these for decades. A true resonant. An instrument that has absorbed its master." He knelt down, his knee cracking. His voice was now level with hers, a predator's murmur. "You're in terrible danger here, you know. It's feeding on you. That's why you look so pale. Why you feel so drained after your little sessions. It's drinking your life to mend its own strings." Mirabel shook her head, a small, convulsive movement. "You're lying." "Am I?" he countered, his voice smooth and persuasive, a horrifying counterpoint to the violence he had just committed. "Think about it. The cold, the exhaustion, the memories that aren't yours. This isn't a ghost, my dear. It's a parasite in a gilded cage, and it will drain you until you are nothing but a husk." He paused, letting the words sink into the ringing silence. "But I can save you. I can free you from it." "How?" The word was torn from her, a desperate, hopeless question. "I will dismantle it," Roderick said, and the clinical coldness in his tone was more terrifying than his scream. "Carefully, piece by piece, I will extract the resonant core, the heartwood that holds the consciousness. I will contain it. The rest, the ivory, the wires, the casework, fetch a handsome price. The entity will be secured, and you will be free. You can walk away from this place and never feel its chill again." He was offering her an escape, a monstrous, clinical, horrifying escape. He would perform an autopsy on Lucien, dissect him for parts and profit, and call it a rescue. Mirabel thought of the vibrations of memory, the shared melancholy, the silent gratitude, the agonized scream that had shaken the house to its foundations. It was a monster, perhaps, a parasite, possibly, but it was a soul. And this man, this butcher of sound, wanted to put in a jar. She turned her head, directing her voice toward the heat of his presence. "No," she said. Her voice was quiet, but it had the density of forged iron. "Get away from him, and get away from me." For a long moment, there was no sound but the man's breathing, a soft, steady rhythm of surprise, then irritation. "A shame," Roderick Flint sighed, the false sympathy curdling in his throat. He stood up, his knee cracking again. "I thought you were intelligent. You choose the monster in the box over the man offering you the key." His heavy footsteps moved away from her, back toward the piano, back toward his tools. Mirabel's entire body tensed. She could feel the ambient, wounded thrum of the piano intensify, a vibration of pure, helpless terror. "Loyalty to a thing like that is a sickness," Flint stated, his voice flat and cold from across the room. "And sometimes the only cure for a sickness is to burn it out." She heard him pick up the hammer again. Not the small one this time. She heard the dull, metallic scrape as he lifted a much heavier tool. A claw hammer, perhaps, or a mallet from a toolbox. Its weight was a palpable threat in the air. His footsteps were slow, measured, each one a drumbeat of doom. 1, 2, 3. He stopped directly in front of the piano's keyboard. He was going to do more than test a string. He was going to destroy the entire instrument. He was going to murder the soul inside. Mirabel pushed herself to her feet, her chair scraping backwards. "Don't," she breathed, a plea lost in the vast, wounded silence of the salon. She heard the sound of Roderick Flint raising his arm, the whisper of his woolen coat, the creak of his shoulder. She felt the shift in the air, the displacement of a heavy object being lifted for a powerful, final blow aimed at the piano's heart. The silence stretched, taut and screaming, a single held breath before the irrevocable act of destruction. The first sound was a splintering crack that did not come from the storm outside. It came from the front door. Mirabel's head snapped up, the delicate vibration of the piano key she was tuning dying under her finger. The house, her instrument, her entire world of resonant wood and hollow spaces groaned in protest. Another crack, louder this time, a brutal percussion that sent a shock wave through the floorboards, up her legs, and into the base of her spine. It was the sound of metal biting deep into oak. Lucien was a sudden, chilling absence beside her. The low, constant static that was the soundtrack to his existence, a hum of ancient hunger and controlled power, vanished, replaced by a silence so complete it was a sound in itself. A predator's silence. Heavy, booted footsteps crunched on the porch. More than one, for maybe 5 distinct sets of heavy treads, each one a dull, a rhythmic hammer blow against the house's frame. They were not trying to be quiet. They were announcing their violence. Flint, Lucien's voice was a low growl that vibrated the very air in front of Mirabel's face. It was the deepest, most dangerous note she had ever heard him produce. A coarse laugh answered from outside, muffled by the door but oozing with a smug, grating texture. "Let's see how your creature appreciates a bit of renovation, Ashford." "Men!" The world exploded. A sledgehammer slammed into the wall beside the door, not to break it down, but to tear it apart. The plaster didn't just crack. It pulverized, raining a fine, gritty dust into the air that she could taste on her tongue. The impact was a deafening, bass-heavy thump that stole the air from her lungs. Another followed, and another from different parts of the house. They were dismantling her world, board by board. Mirabel's sonar, the intricate map of the room she built from echoes and reverberations, shattered. The clean acoustics of the parlor were replaced by a mudslide of noise. The rhythmic shriek of a crowbar prying floorboards, the high-pitched scream of nails being tortured from century-old wood, the guttural grunts of men exerting force. Every impact was a flash of white noise in her mind, blinding her, erasing the shapes of the furniture, the walls, Lucien himself. She was adrift in a hurricane of pure chaos, her hands clamped over her ears, a useless gesture against a noise that was felt more than heard. The vibrations were a physical assault, a relentless pummeling against her bones. A new sound cut through the demolition, the high, thin whine of a power tool. A saw, its teeth bit into the side of the house, a monstrous, continuous shriek that climbed in pitch until it felt like a needle being pushed directly into her eardrum. She cried out, a thin, lost sound swallowed by the maelstrom. She couldn't find Lucien. The noise was too thick, a physical barrier between them. He was a ghost in the sonic storm. Then, from the center of the room, came Lucien's answer. It started not as a sound, but as a pressure change. The air grew thick, dense, compressing around her until her chest ached. It was the silence before a lightning strike, a deep intake of breath on a cosmic scale. When it came, it was not a human scream. It was the sound of reality tearing. A pure, impossibly high frequency erupted from him, a spear of sound that lanced through the cacophony. Mirabel felt it hit her like a physical blow, throwing her back against the leg of the piano. The saw outside died with a choke cough. The hammering stopped. The entire world was this one soul-shattering note. And then the glass began to break. It was not a crash, but an explosion. A crystalline symphony of annihilation. The great bay windows behind her, the glass in the china cabinet, the mirror over the mantelpiece, every light bulb in every socket, they all detonated in the same microsecond. A shower of sharp, tiny fragments rained down, and the sound of it was like a billion tiny bells all ringing their highest, sharpest note at once. The storm outside howled through the new, empty frames of the windows, adding its wet, chaotic roar to the torment. Mirabel was on the floor, curled into a ball, her body convulsing with the vibrations. The scream went on, a weaponized agony that scoured the air clean. She could feel the men Roderick brought. Their presence was a discordant jumble of panicked heartbeats and ragged, choked breaths. They were on the floor, clutching their heads, but Lucien's scream wasn't for them. It was for the piano. It was a barrier of pure sound, a fortress of rage to protect the last piece of his humanity. But it was killing her, too. Her teeth throbbed, the fine bones of her inner ear feeling as if they would splinter and break. Thought was impossible. There was only the sound, the pain, the screaming vibration that threatened to unmake her. Her hand, scrabbling for purchase on the floor, brushed against the smooth, cool brass of the piano's pedal. The piano, an idea, not a thought, but a pure instinct, bloomed in the screaming void. A counter-frequency, a harmony. She pulled herself forward, crawling over the grit of shattered plaster and the razor-sharp dust of glass. The sound wave was a physical current she had to fight against. Her muscles screamed in protest. Every inch was a battle. She reached the bench, pulled herself up. Her fingers, trembling violently, found the keys. They felt slick, coated in a fine layer of dust. Lucien's scream was a single, unwavering needle of sound. Perfect, terrible, and absolute. It had a pitch. She could find it. She ignored the pain, the roaring in her head, the chaos. She focused on that one terrible note. Her left hand fell upon the bass keys. She didn't play a melody. She struck a chord, a low, resonant triad that was the architectural opposite of a scream. It was deep and broad and rooted in the earth. The sound that rolled from the piano was not music. It was a foundation, a platform of pure vibration that met Lucien's scream in the air. For a terrifying second, they warred. The air crackled. The pressure in the room became unbearable. Mirabel felt a trickle of warmth from her nose. Then they locked. The two frequencies did not cancel each other. They merged. They harmonized. Mirabel felt the shift instantly. Lucien's raw, scattered rage was no longer a wave, but a focused beam. Her chord was the lens, and his scream was the light passing through it. Together, they created something new, a precise, controlled weapon. She held the chord, her whole body shaking with the effort of keeping the harmony stable. She could feel the focused beam of sound sweep across the room, guided by an intelligence that was not hers, but that she was now a part of. She felt the panicked, arrhythmic heartbeats of Roderick's men stutter and fail, not stopping, but being forced into a new, sluggish, unconscious rhythm. There were no cries of pain, just a series of dull, heavy thuds as their bodies collapsed, one by one. The vibrations of their falls were clean, final. A single, ragged heartbeat remained, frantic and full of a tinny, high-pitched fear. Roderick. Mirabel felt a wet, sticky sound near the doorway, a spatter, followed by a choked gasp of agony. He was bleeding from his ears. She felt his terrified scramble backward, the wrench of the ruined front door, and then the sound of his clumsy, stumbling retreat into the storm. And then he was gone. The pressure in the air vanished. Lucien's scream cut off. Silence. Not the absence of noise, but a presence. It descended upon the room like a physical weight, thick and absolute. The raging storm outside seemed a universe away, its roar muffled and distant. The only sound was the high, thin ringing in Mirabel's own ears, the aftershock of the sonic assault. The blood from her nose dripped, a slow, warm metronome onto the ivory keys. One drop. Two. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic, wild drum in the sudden, vast emptiness. She held her breath, listening for the one sound that had been a constant since she'd met him. The low-level static, the hum of the predator, the vibration of coiled power, the sonic signature of the vampire. It was gone. The air around him was now as still and quiet as the rest of the room. The silence that emanated from him was no longer the focused quiet of a hunter. It was peaceful, clean, a perfect null. Her fingers, slick with blood and trembling with exhaustion, hovered over the keys. She drew a shaky breath, the dust of destruction sharp in her throat, and played one final chord. A simple C major. The sound that emerged from the grand piano was the purest she had ever produced. Each note was perfectly defined, round and warm. It bloomed into the new silence, hanging in the air without distortion, without the slightest vibration of interference. It was the sound of a bell ringing in a vacuum. It was the sound of resolution, the sound of something broken being made whole. The chord faded slowly, its decay clean and perfect, until it too was swallowed by the profound quiet. She remained there, her hands resting on the keys, her head bowed. Every muscle in her body ached. The world felt raw, stripped down to its essential elements. The cool wood beneath her fingers, the iron tang of blood in her mouth, and the vast, peaceful silence. She didn't hear him move. There were no creaking floorboards, no whisper of cloth, no disturbance in the air. But she felt the piano bench dip beside her. She felt the faintest warmth radiate from him, a gentle heat in the cool, storm-chilled air of the ruined parlor. He was just there, a solid, silent presence. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The questions, the fears, the constant negotiation with a monster inside him, all of that was gone, burned away by the terrible harmony they had created. All that was left was him and her. Mirabel slowly lifted her left hand from the keys. She turned it over, palm up, in the space between them. A silent offering. After a moment, she felt the cool, still touch of his fingers gently enveloping her own. His hand was steady, calm. There was no tremor of hunger, no thrum of restrained violence. Just the quiet contact of his skin against hers. They sat there for a long time, side by side on the piano bench, surrounded by the wreckage of the battle. They existed in a space beyond words, beyond sound. A perfect, shared silence that was more intimate than any confession, more profound than any symphony. The storm raged on outside, but inside the broken house, for the first time, there was peace. The moment the sonic scream shatters the windows, it isn't just glass that breaks, but the illusion of control. In our lives, we all face storms of chaos, external pressures, and internal rages that threaten to tear our worlds apart. This story is about the terrifying, beautiful realization that sometimes the only way to overcome the noise is not to silence it, but to find the one true note within it that you can harmonize with. It's about discovering that our deepest vulnerabilities can become the source of our greatest strength, and that true peace is found not in the absence of struggle, but in the quiet connection we forge in its aftermath. If you are moved by this story of finding harmony in the heart of chaos, please subscribe to the channel and share in the comments how you find your own quiet in the storm.